My name is Tim Yesko, and I'm a PhD student in the Atmosphere and Energy program at Stanford University. My research is on optimizing portfolios of distributed energy resources to tackle hotspots on the electric distribution network. So what is a hotspot? Broadly, it's a region of the grid where distributed energy resources can provide value by alleviating an upstream grid operations or infrastructure problem. There's many examples of these. It could be a region of the grid where a substation is running over capacity for much of the year, or a distribution line that's overly congested with growing demand downstream, or a region of the grid that's experiencing the issues associated with the high penetration of solar energy. Adding in the fact that our infrastructure is aging and population growing, it's estimated that utilities will need to spend upwards of $600 billion on distribution network infrastructure over the next 20 years alone. What if instead we could delay or eliminate the need for this infrastructure investment by using distributed energy? What I've done is built a model that optimizes portfolios of distributed energy resources to solve one or a combination of these issues that real utilities are having to deal with today. The model optimizes over 4 general categories of distributed energy resources. The first being distributed solar. Where should we put it? What orientation is best to maximize the total value, not just the total energy production? Energy efficiency. What programs are best suited to reduce both energy and peak power demand? Demand response. How is the world of demand response changing with these new residential programs and dispatchable loads? And perhaps the most versatile of all the distributed energy resources, energy storage. How do we leverage behind-the-meter storage to provide value for both the customer and the utility? So the next time your utility is wondering what to do about their distribution issues, think distributed energy resources. I'll see you back on the slopes.
Well, as you heard, our electricity infrastructure is changing. I want to put that in historical perspective. And I'd like to frame the issue for this panel to discuss. So what are we dealing with? What are the big questions and challenges? Here they are. How can we decarbonize the grid while reducing costs for both electricity consumers and electricity delivery businesses? Second question, what are the most underutilized levers, technologies, policies, et cetera, and we heard a few of them already, for reducing costs, increasing reliability, and reducing emissions? And finally, what are the biggest threats? And we heard a few yesterday from the general about cyber threats, but there are business model threats as well. And what should be done about them? Those are the big issues. And the grid is really the largest machine in this world. And that is in the process of changing. Let me explain. The origins of the grid goes back to Tesla and Edison. We are literally living in the Tesla-Edison architecture and the paradigm today. This was the internet during Tesla and Edison's time. You have centralized generation, long-distance high-voltage transmission, medium-voltage distribution in neighborhoods, and low-voltage use in your homes. These were, the generation were continuous, centralized plants because they were cheaper. And there was one-way power flow from the generation to the loads. The loads were passive, and when you turned on your motor or turned on your light, somewhere the generation had to turn up. The generation always tracked the load. And the only way for the generation to understand that some load has come up somewhere is that the frequency changed. Because in Tesla and Edison's time, that was the only mechanism of communicating, is frequency. That is the paradigm that we have today. And now what we're trying to do to this, and by the way, this is not just a technical paradigm. Around this paradigm, we have created this ecosystem. It's a system of systems. There's a technology aspect. There are markets that we'll hear about. There are business models, and we heard that they need to change. The regulations, the policy, there's financing, as we heard about, and the institutions, utilities, grid operators, FERC, you heard about, public utility commissions, and we're going to hear about that. So when that paradigm is being questioned, the question is, what happens to this ecosystem? So that's the big question that we have. If I can just move my slides. What happens when the Tesla-Edison paradigm is questioned? So if you step back from all this, this is what is going on. So what is changing? Well, California wants to put 50% renewables from wind and solar. This has been decided, and it's a law. There are other states that want to do that too. Other countries want to do that. India wants to put 100 gigawatts of solar, 60 gigawatts of wind on a grid today that is 275 gigawatts. How is it going to do that? So that's one. Then we heard about energy efficiency requirements and demand response. We heard about the FERC 745 that allows demand to be dispatched the same way as generation. That's interesting. Then distributed energy that you all heard about, but solar storage at the grid edge. The Tesla-Edison grid was never designed for these changes. So what do we do about it? So the question really is, how do we minimize the cost, not so much of electricity generation, but of delivery? So what are the options? Well, one option is to add long-distance transmission. If we could do that, that would reduce the cost, because that would play against the intermittency in two different regions that may not be correlated. But we have a severe problem in the United States about permitting process of long-distance transmission. Number two, we could add generation or storage. And while it is said that storage could help, how much storage? It costs money. And then finally, we heard about flexible loads. Well, you want the load to follow the generation, but the Tesla-Edison grid was never designed for that. We have to change it. And finally, what is the minimum cost? Maybe it is a combination of 1, 2, and 3. But how do we get it done? So that's the dilemma that we face today. And by the way, we heard about security. These are the reported cybersecurity threats up to 2013. And they're going up. These are reported to the Department of Homeland Security. And the one that is more than 50% is energy. This is broadly about energy. Part of that is on our grid. These are the issues that we're dealing with. And so one of the things that we're doing at Stanford now is putting together an initiative to really address this. So this is a Stanford Slack initiative called Bits and Watts. We need data, we need information, and perhaps we can leverage a new infrastructure that Tesla and Edison never had to help the grid make these transitions at the lowest cost and with the highest reliability and resilience. And this is not just a technical paradigm. It really has to address the business model question, the financing, the policies, the markets, et cetera. And so this spans across the whole campus. This is not just engineering. This is business school, law school, other schools all put together. This spans Stanford and Slack. And this has to be done in partnership with the industry and the ecosystem of regulators, et cetera. So let me stop here. That's the framing of the issue. And let me hand it over to Dian and her team.
Thank you very much, Arun. I think that really set the stage for what I hope is going to be a very interesting discussion, because we are very happy to have here on the stage two people who are right in the middle of moving us from this Tesla-Edison grid to the new future and grappling with all the problems. So let me start off with, we heard Arun talk about California has our new goal on 50% renewables by 2030. And as Arun said, this is not some goal. This is actually a new law, SB 350, that was passed by our legislature and signed by the governor and became effective in January this month. It requires that California, as I said, by 2030 has 50% renewables. In California, the definition of renewables for our RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standard, is essentially what we think of as the larger scale renewables on the utility side of the meter. That doesn't count all the goals that we have in California that we'll talk about in a minute for the resources on the customer side of the meter, the solar PV. And so we think about both of these together. So let me start with Mike, you work at the California Public Utilities Commission, an agency that is very responsible for ensuring affordable rates. You also have the agency that is looking at procurement, as well as thinking through not just on the supply side, but on demand and energy efficiency. Is this pie in the sky, California crazy thinking, or could we actually make this happen?
Well, I think we can and we will. A few years ago, California set the goal of 33% by 2020. And many people looked at that and said, that's not going to work. Well, we're essentially there or almost there ahead of schedule. And part of the reason for that has been the incredible decline in the cost of solar PV. Contracts that were signed 7 years ago, solar was costing 15 cents a kilowatt hour. Today, we're seeing new contracts being signed. Now, this is for the 20 to 50 to 100 megawatt size, but 5 or 6 cents a kilowatt hour, fixed or very minimally increasing for 20 years. So it's happening, and similar things have happened with wind. There are better places than California for wind, but we have quite a bit of it already ourselves, and we may be looking either elsewhere in the state or elsewhere around the West for more of it. But the solar, the potential is almost endless because California, Arizona, and Nevada have great solar insulation and ability to deploy solar, whether it's on the rooftop or on a central station facility. The question, and what really is where I think the cost issue comes in, is the integration, which Steve and I deal with on a regular basis, as it's not so much the intermittency from minute to minute, it's the fact that all this solar shuts off at about the same time everywhere in California because the sun sets. And that puts a tremendous strain on the grid just when people are getting home from work, firing up to cook dinner, to do everything else when they return home. And that's exactly when we're seeing the drop-off of solar. The ISO illustrated very effectively a few years ago with the so-called duck curve, that in the middle of the day, we may have too much solar power, more than there is demand, and in the evening, we've got to find something else and find it quickly. There are a number of things that we're working on to deal with that. I mean, some of it is done with gas-fired generation, but increasingly we're looking to storage, electric vehicles, demand response, and a whole variety of techniques, as well as regionalization. California, for the last almost 20 years, has been the only state participating in the California ISO. Now, through some recent very good diplomatic work by the ISO, they have brought utilities in a number of other states into the energy imbalance market. That's a real-time market that now serves customers in, Nevada came in this year, Arizona will be in the end of this year, October. We've got parts of Oregon, Utah, Wyoming, a little bit of Washington, more of Washington coming in this fall. And that provides a much larger market to smooth out these issues. So, there are a lot of tools in the toolbox. We need to figure out what's the best combination. And at the end of the day, if not all else fails, we can curtail those renewables in the middle of the day, but that's throwing away free power, so we don't want to do that. But You know, we can get there, we will get there, and if we're smart about it, it'll be at an affordable cost.
Thank you. Steve, if you can offer your perspective on, as the state's moving to this 50% renewable, and I think some of the modeling that's been done looking at our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals in California beyond 2030 has looked at we may need to get up to 75 or even 80% renewables for electricity serving California, and presumably looking at a wider system, as Mike said, in the West. And you're really, in my mind, the guy in charge of a reliable system.
So they say.
The PSC is too, but I'm sure you think night and day about, this is great that California woke up and decided to have all these clean energy policies, but you're the person that has to make this work in terms of the physical system and also some of the innovations that you've really brought in on the markets. What's your perspective on, are we going to be able to do this, and what are the key factors?
Sure, that's a great question, and I think the response is probably about 90 minutes long, but I'll try to condense it down. I think fundamentally, let me just paint the picture of what's going on in California. And for all of those who are not in California, I know that you think California is crazy, but let me submit this to you.
Say yes.
Let me submit this to you. If not for greenhouse gas reductions, economics, as you saw in the Middletown example, is going to drive change in our industry. And I would argue the change is going to be fairly dramatic, and it's going to be pretty swift relative to the 100-year history of the grid. In California now we have about 6,000 megawatts of solar and about 5,000 megawatts of wind and geothermal and a number of other renewable energy resources. And any given day, we serve about 25% of the load with renewables, and in a number of days, we serve 40% of the load with renewables. What we see, the challenges we have, and Mike Florio talked about those a little bit, is that it really exacerbates ramps, so we need to deal with that. And you also have this issue with overgeneration. Luckily, there are solutions to all those problems, though, and we're working on them. The most impactful thing that we can do in California is collaborate more with the rest of the West. Mike talked about that, and I can give you an example. When the sun comes up, the load curve in California comes up about 4:30 in the morning. Obviously, there's no solar in California. There is in Arizona, and there is in Nevada, and there is in New Mexico. And that same solar could serve load in California. Similarly, when it's still 110 degrees in Las Vegas, California is not that hot, and it can provide its excess power over there. That'll lower the cost for everyone. The other issue we're going to have is overgeneration. And our studies show we could have overgeneration up to 13,000 megawatts in certain hours across the year. That's a lot of power. To give you some perspective, a nuclear power plant is about 2,000 megawatts, so that's 5 or 6 excess nuclear plants of power that you have to deal with. We have to balance the grid, and as Mike said, our option is to curtail it. Our other option is to share it regionally, which I think we can do. The third option is to think holistically about what cheap, clean power can do from an economic and societal perspective. Storage is part of the answer. Electrification of the transportation sector is part of the answer, and you alluded to this. California has very aggressive greenhouse gas goals. To get to those, we're going to have to decarbonize the transportation industry, and electricity is the likely leverage point to be able to do that. So all of that will have to fit in harmony for us to be able to decarbonize, as you first asked about.
So let me shift to the other major policy change, or one of them going on in California that we've touched upon, but I want to go into a little bit more depth, and that is what California refers to as distributed energy resources. And I think we just had a great student video up there that helped educate us when we talk about a DER, what is that about? And as I said at the beginning, the way California has set up its policy goals and laws is you have that one bucket on the RPS of 50%, but then we have other goals as well, which I believe it is for distributed generation on the customer side of the meter, 12,000 megawatts by 2020. We had one of our laws this year, or just the end of 2015, doubles the state's energy efficiency goals year after year after year. And California already thought it was the leader, and now it's going to go into, quite frankly, entirely new areas. California adopted a couple of years ago the first ever standard on storage requirements. And then what you were just talking about, our electrification. So when we add into the mix these DERs, the distributed energy resources, with, in my mind, the additional complication that the visibility into what's going on with the customer side of the meter is far, far less, both from a grid operator as well as from the utilities, especially the distribution operators, not just for even understanding what people may be doing in decisions, but then once they're implemented, what's really going on. So how do we have a system that's going to work where we have both the intermittency going on with the large-scale renewables, the need to have integration so that it is affordable and reliable, and then we've got all this other stuff on the customer side that we may not know that much about, at least under current technology and information systems?
I'll take the first stab at that. Right now, California is adding between 8,000 and 10,000 rooftops a month of solar arrays. And it exacerbates, frankly, the challenges that a system operator has to manage the grid. But I think more importantly, it really highlights a macro trend that we've got and has been discussed the last couple of panels. And this is a trend I think we all need to get our arms around. There's the trend from central station generation and long transmission lines to load centers to distributed generation more and more and more. And it's incumbent upon us to be able to see those distributed resources and to be able to leverage those distributed resources. As an example, the intermittency of the renewables could perhaps be managed through the management of the distributed resources. If we don't leverage the distributed resources, we'll have to add effectively the same and duplicate the same resources on the transmission grid, which for Mike and his responsibilities puts intense pressure on rates, which we cannot do. So what we're doing now is we're planning a grid that used to be largely thermally oriented, coal, gas, nuclear, and had a little bit of renewables, to one that's renewable based and supported by the thermal grid. And that's how the planning has to work, and both of our organizations have to work together to do that.
Mike?
Yes, and I think this is where the data really comes in. We're going to need much more granular data about what's going on. Now, California has already invested in smart meters, but that only gets us part of the way. And we're still working on really fully integrating the information we're getting from the smart meters into the operations. In fact, I think we're just beginning. But the real challenge here is, what Steve's organization does at the wholesale level, at the transmission level, is monitor very carefully what's going on all over the grid. The distribution system is pretty dumb. It doesn't do that. And we need that if we're going to have all of these resources at the customer location. We have launched a proceeding. It's somewhat similar to New York Rev, probably not quite as ambitious, but we are looking and asking our utilities to look in a very granular way at the distribution system and figure out what are the places where installing distributed generation or demand response or storage could actually help the grid to relieve congestion, to defer major capital investments. And it's hard work. You're basically mapping things that have never been mapped in real time before. And then there's another huge volume of data that has to be managed. And gosh, I wanted to hire that young guy from Stanford. I mean, we talk about this in theory. Yeah, we can't afford him. But that's exactly what we're talking about, is optimizing all these different resources, finding a package of things that meets the particular needs in that geographic area, which may be completely different from another circuit 20 miles away. So, there's a tremendous amount of work to be done here. I'm convinced it can't possibly be managed by a state regulatory agency. We have to get the incentives right and the business models right so that the utilities, or conceptually maybe some other entity, becomes the distribution system operator the way Steve is the transmission system operator. I don't think you want the whole thing.
But we most certainly do not.
Yeah. But it's a sea change, and it's all dependent on the technology. I mean, this was unthinkable 20 years ago, and now it's really possible. One of the things that we've done is really push forward on this concept of demand response. We have a pilot program that we've just launched where innovative companies are coming in and offering not just large industrial and commercial demand response, but networks of residential customers that can provide measurable megawatts of demand response when needed by the ISO. And the ISO has been very progressive in finding ways to include those aggregated portions of small resources in their market. And we are just at the beginning of this, and how it's all going to play out remains to be determined. But I feel much better knowing there's smart young folks like that coming along behind us old timers to make it all work.
Well, and I want to say that this is one reason the discussion is highlighting why Stanford and our associated national lab, SLAC, has taken on launching this new project, Bits and Watts, because our belief is that Silicon Valley and Stanford and SLAC, we are blessed with wonderful resources in terms of people, the students, the researchers, the faculty, but also a real culture of innovation. And we call it Bits and Watts because we want to emphasize that it is both the physical grid, but also the management of information. And so looking forward how we can be working, with entities such as your organizations in real time of what are your problems so that the research questions we take on are relevant. I want to probe a little bit harder though in one area, and that is that in the energy world in the United States, we have neatly divided it on a legal basis into there's a wholesale world and there's a retail world. And the wholesale world, which is substation and transmission level, and that is regulated by an agency back in Washington, D.C., FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and that is who essentially CAISO gets approval for its tariffs and programs, et cetera. And then we say there's this very nice dividing line when you get to the substation, and everything starts with the distribution line, and that is in the retail world, and that's regulated by the PUCs, albeit 50 different PUCs in different states, all with their own different rules. I personally do not see how we can possibly keep that same paradigm when we're talking about having to, integrate an entire system. We're talking about how to be able to plan knowing what's going on at all levels of the system, and collectively we've got to keep this affordable. Yet you respond to a different master and you're your own master. And none of the laws have changed, and if we're going to change this, it's a federal change as well. Other than great cooperation, what are we going to do?
Well,
you can come back next year and tell us.
No, you hit on a really important thing, because more and more, as I said, the trend goes to resources on the distribution system. This thing is going to come to the fore, and there's going to be skirmishes around it. The transmission distribution interface is going to be redefined, and there's going to be jurisdictional disputes about it. We should just know that. However, I really think if we keep the right principles at play, that we have a reliable system that's decarbonating at a reasonable cost, our organizations can find a way to navigate that. I think the Public Utility Commission full well knows to be able to contain costs, the ISO is going to have to use resources on the distribution system. Otherwise, we're going to build more power plants, and that's not good for anyone, except for the power plant people. And I really think we can come to terms with it if we keep those principles in front of us.
Go ahead.
I agree. I think one of the things that we've really achieved over the last 10 years is good cooperation day to day, not just at the upper levels, but at the staff levels between our two organizations. And that's essential. But there are going to be challenges, but I think we can do it, and we have to do it.
And I would add this, Diane. I think it's really impressed upon us that we need to do this right. We have to write the playbook for what the 21st century grid, how it operates, and jurisdictional issues and all those things, because the rest of the U.S., frankly, is going to be coming to the same place we are, whether it's from the Clean Power Plan or from economics, and the rest of the world is going to do that too. And we want to be able to do this the cheapest, best way and be effective at it. You see models in Germany that were talked about. You see models in Spain that were talked about. We must do better than that.
We're going to have...
It's a very fun thing to wake up every morning thinking the whole world is watching, don't screw it up.
That's right.
Keeps you on your toes.
Yeah.
So we have 3 minutes. We've gotten some questions, and especially where they've come from some of the students here. 3 questions, 1 minute each, whoever wants to answer. Mexico, this is a North American conference. What's going on as far as cooperation work with Mexico?
I can do that. As was discussed earlier today, Mexico is transforming their energy industry from petroleum extraction and distribution and electric delivery. California and the Baja Peninsula are interconnected. The rest of Mexico and the U.S. are not that connected. We've had immense discussions back and forth between us and Mexico about how we can better cooperate, how we can better tie our systems together to do really the things we're trying to do, which is they want to decarbonize their grid too, and they want to do it in a cost-effective way, and sharing resources is the best way to do that. And I truly expect more of that collaboration to continue. In fact, this energy imbalance market that Mike was talking about spreading across the West, it is possible that the Baja Peninsula would participate in that.
Okay. Question number 2. Role of California utilities. Helping, hurting on the innovation and all we're trying, what should be done?
Well,
30 seconds, 60 seconds to save you from too long.
Yeah, electric utilities as we've had them have not been set up to be sources of innovation, but they do a lot of things very well. And I think what we have to figure out from a policy basis is how do we identify those things they do well, get out of the way and let them do them, and the things that they don't do so well, we give other people a shot at it. I mean, that's in the demand response field. The utilities have had programs for years, but we have all these innovative new companies coming in. So, I don't think the utilities are going to go away. but they will change with the times and perhaps become more a platform provider than simply an infrastructure provider.
Final question. What would you advise bright Stanford students to think about as far as a career in energy if this is where they're interested?
Well, it's a tremendously exciting place. I mean, I've been in this business for almost 40 years, and I continue to learn things every day. It is really exciting. I would recommend you get a broadly based education, economics, engineering, accounting, law and policy. I mean, all those things come together in this area in a way that I'm not sure it's like anywhere else. So, you know, I struggle because I never took an engineering course in my life. You know, I keep looking for electrical engineering for dummies, and I haven't been able to find it. But Steve's taught me a lot, and his people, you know. I don't quite know what reactive power is, but I know it's really important that you have it where you need it. And we're all learning together.
Yeah, I would echo what Mike is saying. This is a rapidly changing industry. I think being part of that and having the opportunity to actually shape it and how it will look is truly an exciting prospect. Our organization, as an example, is a confluence of physics, economics, and financial. And it's a pretty interesting confluence of events.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.